It was 2 days of fighting that changed a country forever. 150 years on, it remains misunderstood, chaotic, confused. Much of what we're left with are the words of those who experienced that horror firsthand.
This was my first time being shot at, and I was as scared as the next man.
This is an awful battle.
We had a bad day's work ahead of us.
None of the glories of the war are present here. God forgive them.
This is a simple story of battle.
At Shiloh, our nation would come to realize the true bloody cost of civil war. For a year after the start of the Civil War, nearly all believed the fight would be quickly settled with little bloodshed. Kate Cumming, a Scottish immigrant turned Southerner, was one such believer.
We hoped for peace. Few of us expected war. Oh, but we were full of zeal and patriotism in those days. Soldiers going full of glee, saying they were going to spend a nice summer in old Virginia. I'd never been where there was a large army. I'd never seen a wounded man before, with the exception of seeing them in the cars passing by.
John Rowlands escaped the orphanages and workhouses of Wales for a new life in America. Eager to fit in, he adopted the local accent and a new name, Henry M. Stanley.
All things considered, though, I'd rather be back in Wales. It seemed as if Arkansas County was to be emptied of all the youth and men I had known. When I was asked if I did not intend to join the fight, I answered yes. Certainly a grave blunder.
Henry Villard was yet another immigrant who sought a new life in America and found it as a correspondent for the New York Tribune.
No one foresaw the fearful proportions which the Civil War would assume. Quick and decisive, one great effort to finish it. Only General Sherman thought the number of troops should be multiplied many times, and he was thought insane. Even the Union-defeated Manassas was ascribed to lack of discipline. Nothing more.
Defeat appeared to make the northern people even more ferocious than ever, and 1862 opened with disaster. I could not help but think about my own young brother in the midst of the fight.
In February, the Army and Navy under Union Brigadier General Ulysses Grant and Flag Officer Andrew Foote had worked together to capture Forts Henry and Donelson. Combined with the loss at Mill Springs, Kentucky, General Albert Sidney Johnston, the Western Confederate commander, was forced to move southwest, handing over Kentucky and much of Tennessee, including the crucial supply and industrial center of Nashville.
The blow was severe. Immense quantities of war material had fallen to the victor, together with all the strategic points.
The northern states were electrified. This great triumph instantly broke the spell of apprehension that had kept the Union commanders in the West on the defensive. It did nothing less than open the way for the Union armies to the very heart of the Confederacy.
General Johnston withdrew Beauregard's army to Corinth in Mississippi, where he hoped to recruit and equip it to retake the lost territory.
We marched through the snow toward the south via Murfreesboro, Tullahoma, Athens, and Decatur. A march of 250 miles. And we arrived in Corinth on the 25th of March.
In this day, rivers and rails are the key means to move men and supplies quickly, and Corinth, Mississippi is a crucial southern rail link. It straddles the Mobile and Ohio Railroad and sat on the only line connecting the Atlantic and the Mississippi. Major General Henry Halleck, commanding the Department of Mississippi, ordered federal forces up the Tennessee River, a major conduit into the heart of the Western Confederacy. The Federals embarked in March, using 174 steamboats to ferry almost 40,000 men toward Corinth and Johnston. Ann Wallace was the young wife of General William H.L. Wallace, a rising star in Grant's Western Army. The war meant they were often separated by hundreds of miles.
My husband William's letters seemed weary, depressed. I knew he would not think it consistent with his duty to send for me, but if I could go to him, spend a few hours with him, it would rest, relieve him. My brother said I was crazy. Nearly all of my friends talked the same way, but I determined to go anyway.
I'd never been inside of a hospital, but I knew what one woman had done another could do. I was met with much opposition. One said nursing soldiers was no work for a refined lady. I said that if my brother was sick or wounded, I could not expect any woman to do for him what I was unwilling to do for others. Go ahead and sit up.
I had to take a night train. And when I arrived, the hotel keeper told me it was utterly useless. I would not get beyond Cairo. But I could not turn back. A chaplain from the 20th took a note from me to the general's headquarters and came back 10 minutes later with a permit for the boat. As we steamed along, I was perfectly jubilant. Along the way, some officers came on board intending to take me ashore, but my permit was law to them.
Oliver Boardman was an Indiana farm boy raised by his father after his mother died. When he marched off with the Northern Army, it was the first time he had ever ventured beyond the borders of his county.
Tennessee River was a pretty stream. About half as large as the Ohio and clear of any islands. Our course was almost due south. Began to look like
turn a winter right into summer.
It was at Pittsburgh Landing where Grant established his army. Thickly wooded country, ravines and bayous. The 20 miles to Corinth was, at certain seasons, a branch of the Tennessee River. In 1862, there were some fields and a house or two.
Changed our old muskets for rifles. Called the Springfield rifle. Fixed with sights and could fire 500 yards. There were about 50,000 men, soldiers, gathered here within 4 or 5 days. I had 2 or 3 gunboats, and any amount of artillery and cavalry. There was a big move up some way, but they were keeping it all very secret.
It seemed like a good defensive position. Waterways protected both flanks and their rear, and they were within 20 miles of Corinth. But Halleck, cautious, ordered Grant to hold until the 30,000 men of Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio arrives from Nashville. On April 2nd, Johnston learns that Buell's approaching column is still several days away from meeting Grant. It is an opportunity to strike his opponents while they are divided, and Johnston seizes it. General P.G.T. Beauregard, the hero of Fort Sumter and Bull Run, plans a very complex attack that attempts to coordinate Johnston's 4 corps.
On April 2nd, we were ordered to prepare 3 days' rations, though through some misunderstanding, we didn't set out till April 4th.
The rebel chiefs calculated to arrive on the 4th and assail Grant early on the 5th. The march of the Confederates took a day longer. I am sure these 24 hours weighed more decidedly in the balance of events than any other day in the course of the Civil War.
William C. Thompson was a descendant of Choctaw and Chickasaw natives. His parents died under unclear circumstances, possibly innocent victims of white vigilantes. He settled in Mississippi and, like many, took up arms to defend his adopted homeland.
A heavy rain had turned the roads and trails into quagmires. By mid-morning on Saturday the 5th, our regiment was in its attack position. We were so close to the federal drill grounds, we could plainly hear the commands given by their colonels.
Buell asked information on the position and strength of the enemy. Grant answered from Savannah on the 5th. The enemy at near Corinth from 60 to 80,000. Information deemed reliable. Grant did not dream of the fearful struggle that burst upon him the next day.
Despite warnings, Union commanders are confident that Johnston's army remains at Corinth. General Grant headquarters across the river at Savannah, and few of the regiments manning what is to become his front lines had ever been in a full-scale battle.
Pickets had been skirmishing with the rebels 2 days before the attack. I think the generals had too much confidence in our own strength. Our camp lines are 4 miles long, at least. And they're scattered around through the woods without any regularity.
Believing surprise is lost, Beauregard urges retreat. Undeterred, Johnston declares, "Gentlemen, we will attack at daylight."
Sunday morning, April 6th. Reveille had been sounded late, for the troops were to have a day of rest. The men were idling about the embers of their bivouac fires, some preparing breakfast, others looking carelessly to the condition of their arms.
We loaded our muskets and arranged our cartridge boxes for use. Our weapons were obsolete flintlock, and our ammunition was rolled cartridge paper, which contained powder, a round ball, and 3 buckshot.
Long before the sun rose Sunday morning, we were up, ready to attack the Yanks. The air was charged with suspense, it being the first time in battle for most of us. I kept busy with my duties and tried to conceal my inner fears.
"250 Union men of Everett Peabody's brigade are up early on patrol and find themselves in what they believe is another skirmish.
Boys, it's a whole division! Fall back!
Within earshot of their camps, they find a monster lurking amidst the Tennessee timber. Johnston's intent is to turn Grant's left flank away from the lifeline at Pittsburgh Landing. But it's Grant's right that receives the first Confederate attack as William Hardee's brigades advance on the camps of William Sherman's division.
On the instant rose the sharp, clear note of a bugle. This call was the exhilarating assembly which goes to the heart like wine and stirs the blood like the kisses of a beautiful woman.
As late as 7 a.m., General Sherman remains unconvinced this is a general attack until rebel skirmishers from Cleburne's brigade kill his orderly and shoot him in the hand.
We moved slowly ahead, getting ready for the charge, then picked up speed. Soon we were practically running, everyone beginning to yell.
Our regiment was in General Sherman's division, and on the extreme right. We were the furthest from the river, and came very near being cut off. There were several rebel regiments in our camp before we were out of sight.
The bullets started to rain thick and fast. Little clouds of smoke appeared, and all around us we heard this cracking noise of timber being splintered by the bullets. This was my first time being shot at. I was as scared as the next man.
2 of Cleburne's 6 regiments move around the swamp and get caught in a vicious crossfire.
I began to see men on the ground. I realized they were hurt. For at first I couldn't see their faces. Maybe I didn't want to see them. I had not gone far when a sudden pain hit me. My legs folded and I was on the ground. The fall knocked the breath out of me and I must have fainted, because next thing I knew, someone had me by the shoulder and was dragging me out of the line of fire.
The intense fighting here is just south of a church with a Hebrew name that ironically meant place of peace, Shiloh.
We arrived before daylight at Pittsburgh Landing. We heard a great deal of firing, but it was accounted for as the return of the night pickets, and the emptying of their guns. Captain Coates of the 11th Illinois proposed to walk with me to my husband's headquarters. But he said it would be better for him to go first and see how far it was. Before half an hour, he returned, wounded in 2 places. I learned that a big battle had started, and that my husband and his command had been moved to the front. The only thing for me to do was wait where I was.
Benjamin Prentiss forms his 6th Division, including 12 guns on the Eastern Corinth Road. His untested ranks wither Gladden's brigade. But despite the initial resistance of these men, Grant's lines are soon stretched thin by an army that outnumbers them by almost half.
We heard the order.
6 bayonets!
The men raised out again. It drove all sanity and order from us, but when we arrived in the place where they stood, the bluecoats had vanished.
Many don't stop until they get to Pittsburgh Landing, leaving empty camps, hot meals, and all their belongings. Hungry rebels paused to eat and loot. It was, as one soldier recalled, a good harvest. An hour is lost as commanders, including Johnston, struggle to get these men moving again. Amidst the panic, Union defensive lines are patched together with anyone in shouting distance. And casualties and terrain unravel Confederate command structure. By mid-morning, the battle at Shiloh has become a soldier's fight.
Behind a tree, a dozen of us had flung ourselves. I could hear the bullets bouncing off the outer surface of the log. As one man, he raised up his chest as if to yawn, and I saw that a bullet had gored his whole face. I marveled how anyone could live under this rain and death.
How the news came to us in Savannah? It came on the wind. A messenger that does not bear copious details.
Alerted by the distant thunder of artillery, Grant departs for Pittsburgh Landing around 7:30. He orders Bull Nelson's division of Buell's army to begin moving down the river, but Nelson is unable to march until early afternoon. Grant also orders Lew Wallace's 7,500-man division to reinforce his lines, but a series of errors and delays turn a 2-hour march into 7. Neither will arrive before nightfall. Despite a sprained ankle after arriving at the landing, Grant rides the length of his battle line and rushes men and ammunition to his defenders. But until Wallace and the elements of Buell's army arrive, Grant will fight outnumbered. By 10:30 a.m., the Confederate onslaught starts to overwhelm Grant's right flank.
General Sherman said we'd done everything could be done. We had to get out of there. It's a wonder to me any of us got out of it. The balls flew so thick. I believe if I'd have swung my hat, I caught it nearly half full. One sweep.
Attacks pushed Sherman and McClernand back, first to the crossroads of the Purdy and Corinth roads, and then to Jones Field, a mile and a half from Pittsburgh Landing.
We gained the second line of camps and continued to rush through them. A little further lay some 20 bodies, each laying a pool of viscous blood. Beyond those, a larger group lay still. That half-square-mile woodland was the first field of glory I'd ever seen. That glory sickened me and made me suspect that this all had been a glittering lie.
Johnston succeeds in bending Grant's line, but in the wrong direction, toward Pittsburgh Landing, where the line can be shorter and stronger. With the Union right flank in retreat, entire Confederate regiments fall out of line to eat and pillage. This lull allows Sherman and McClernand to regroup and launch a ferocious counterattack. By noon, they've rolled over the unprepared looting Confederates. For the next 3 hours, Sherman and McClernand's determined stand will force Johnston to commit his last reserves and will occupy the entire western 2/3 of the Confederate army. Confederate brigades on Johnston's right make repeated attempts to dislodge Stephen Hurlbut's division from a blooming peach orchard just south of a pond where the dying crawl for a final drink, earning it the name Bloody Pond. By 2 o'clock, Hurlbut's line begins to give after Johnston personally rallies his brigades to attack en masse. Johnston had an old dueling wound that kept his right leg numb most of the time. He may not have paid much mind to the mini-ball that severed his artery. The wound could have been treated with a tourniquet he carried in his breast pocket, but it wasn't used. By 2:45, Johnston bleeds to death. He is the highest-ranking officer to be killed during the Civil War. In Grant's center, the division of W.H.L. Wallace and the remnants of Prentice's ranks form a half-mile front in a thick overgrowth along an old wagon cut. 6,200 men and 25 cannon make the names of the places there: the Sunken Road, the Hornet's Nest, synonymous with bloodshed.
Only yesterday they professed to shudder at the word murder. Today, they lusted to kill. And they were hounded on by their elders and pastors, mothers and sisters. For once, I was beginning to know the real truth. Man was born to slaughter.
The wounded were brought onto the boat by the hundreds. Some could sit and talk, others helpless and pallid. I passed from place to place holding water and bandages for the surgeons until it became so crowded I felt I was in the way.
Thousands of Grant's men have retreated in panic. Lew Wallace is missing, and Bull Nelson, Buell's lead element, is an hour out of Savannah. Low on options, Grant orders a new line of defense at the landing. Around 4, Sherman and McClernand, with depleted ranks and no fresh troops, fall back. Confederates paused their attack to get ammunition to the front lines. Sherman and McClernand reform along the heights of a rugged ravine. By 4 p.m., Hurlbut withdraws, forcing Prentiss to refuse his left flank. With Grant's right and left flanks in retreat, sounds of heavy fighting in the center draw Confederate brigades like a magnet. W.H.L. Wallace's outnumbered Federals put up a fierce defense from an overgrown thicket. Their intense fire thickens the air with whizzing metal. Rebels call it the Hornet's Nest. Brigadier General Daniel Ruggles pounds the Hornet's Nest with almost 60 cannon, the largest concentration of artillery on the North American continent up to that time.
The enemy maintained their ground, while our side prepared for another assault. Battery pounded battery. The enemy appeared more concentrated, but with assistance from the reserves, we were continually pressing them towards the river, without retreating an inch.
By 5 p.m., elements of 14 of the 16 Confederate brigades on the field surround the Hornet's Nest. Wallace and Prentiss start to withdraw, but it is too late. Only a few manage to escape before they are encircled completely. In all, 2,250 Federals are captured. The day-long Federal stand waged all across the battlefield at such places as the Peach Orchard, Hornet's Nest, and Crossroads staves off total defeat and buys Grant another day to fight.
I've noticed most of the wounded men whom I have talked to talk much about their mothers and sisters. Home sweet home is the dearest spot on earth to them, since they are now deprived of its comforts. Mother, wife, and sister seem to be the sweetest words to them in the English language.
Grant's army has fallen back 2 miles and incurred immense casualties. Heavy cannon fire from the Union timberclads, Tyler and Lexington, pesters the Confederate lines and keeps them at bay.
The gunboat sent roaring 8-inch shells every 10 minutes in the direction of the enemy, in order, at least, to deprive the rebels of rest.
Grant's last line on April 6th is formidable. Confederates must cross huge ravines at Dill and Tillman Branch.
An army beaten back by a sluggish creek that had been pleased to fall into the river at one point or another. Very annoying this must have been.
Stalled, the Confederates withdraw to the captured Union camps. Little effort is made to supply ammunition or reform their exhausted ranks. Beauregard, now in command, believes Grant's reinforcements are not coming and sends a dispatch to Richmond proclaiming complete victory.
We were ordered to retire to the tents. We were short on provisions and ammunition. General Johnston had been killed. And if General Buell and his 20,000 troops had joined the enemy, we had a bad day's work ahead of us.
In fact, the lead divisions of Buell's army had a hand in defending Grant's last line, and Lew Wallace's division finally arrives on the scene about dusk.
The steamer was used to transport some of Buell's men across the river. Over and back, over and back. I saw these shells strike off the sides of other steamboats and cut off limbs of trees. I felt dazed and horrified. yet enthused by some means. Like a soldier, I knew the danger, but felt lifted above the fear of it.
We had a woman on the boat. Fine-looking creature, this woman. Somebody's wife. She stood on the upper deck with the red blaze of battle, the twinkle of 1,000 rifles mirrored in her eyes. She told me if it came to the worst, she would do her duty like a man. I took my hat off to this little fool.
It still seems strange that amid all the terrible scenes of destruction that we are daily witnessing, we think little of death as ever, and act as if it was something that might happen to others, but never to ourselves.
All day long, Northern soldiers fleeing the horror of Grant's battle line run to the shelter along the bluffs at Pittsburgh Landing.
As our boat turned towards the landing, we saw before us a dense mass, apparently numbering thousands.
They were mostly unarmed. Not one of them knew where their regiment was, or if they had a regiment. Whenever a steamboat would land, this mob would have to be kept off her with bayonets. The men disembarking insulted them, shoved them, struck them. In return, they expressed their unholy delight in the certainty of our destruction by the enemy.
One man later recalled, upon seeing the 36th Indiana coming up the road, that never was a sight of a reinforcing legion so precious and so welcome.
My chaplain friend, Elder Button, came up. He said, "This is an awful battle." I replied, "My husband is in command and is comparatively safe." He replied, "It is an awful battle."
Her husband had fallen hours before in the last stand at the hornet's nest. Shot through the head, his body had been left behind as the remnants of his regiment attempted to retreat.
The dread truth fell on my heart like the cold hand of steel.
That night, Sherman finds Grant alone with his thoughts and surrounded by the dead on the ground. "Well," Sherman asks, "we've had the devil's own day, haven't we? Handed his greatest setback since the war began, and with reinforcements streaming in," Grant replies, "Lick 'em tomorrow, though." By 6 a.m., Grant has 40,000 at the ready, half of which are battle fresh. Though these reinforcements had been spotted by Rebel Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, no one in Confederate high command took any action. The weary Confederates number around 28,000.
But where was the enemy? There came to us, borne on the raw morning air, the long, weird note of the bugle.
Regiments hurried into line. I fell into my company, but there was only about 50 present. The troops were in ill condition to repeat the efforts of Sunday.
Despite their exhaustion and disorganization, when Grant's army moved to retake the field and drive the rebels back, Beauregard eventually manages a solid defense. Despite his savage counterattacks, he is forced back 2 hours later to a position along the Hamburg-Purdy Road.
We fought about 3 hours. Had the great satisfaction of seeing the rebels completely routed. It was decidedly the greatest sight I ever saw.
We moved forward. We met our enemy in a short while on the same formation as ourselves and advancing. And I became so absorbed with some blue figures in front of me that I did not pay heed to my companions. And suddenly I found myself a solitary grey. My companions had retreated. The next thing I hear is,
Down with the gun, C Central, put a hole in you.
Ultimately, the Union numbers are too great for Beauregard's depleted ranks. At 2, he pulls back in retreat to Corinth. Grant does not pursue until the next day.
Knapsacks, canteens, rifles, dead horses were everywhere. Men, all dead apparently, except one. A sergeant taking in his breath in rattling snorts and blowing out froth. A bullet had clipped a groove in his skull. The brain protruded. One of my men asked if he should put his bayonet through him. I thought not. Too many were looking.
Piles of dead all around. Surgeons are taking off arms and legs of men carried to them. Wagons are bringing in more wounded, and they're being unloaded like so many butchered hogs. But I am thankful to be alive, and I've been given a furlough to go home.
Sat up all night, bathing the men's faces, giving them water. One man had a dreadful wound of the shoulder, but every time I bathed it, he thanked me. He died this morning before breakfast. I was going round washing the faces of the men. Half through one before I found he was dead. None of the glories of the war are present here. God forgive them.
I looked into the faces of my captors and I felt intolerable loathing. Then some Yank shouts, "Where are you taking that fella to? Drive a bayonet into him." A few dashed from the ranks to execute the wish. But my 2 guards, Ohioans, they flung themselves before me and they cried, "Stop that! He's our prisoner!"
More Johnny's coming through! More prisoners!
And soon I was delivered to the corral and left to my reflections amid the unfortunates.
Pack it up, we're moving out.
As I was sitting next to a wounded man just brought in, word came Will had been brought in, and he was breathing. There on another boat, he lay, wounded. A ball had passed through his head in such a manner that made it marvelous that he could still live. Will recognized my voice, and he clasped my hand. He knew me.
Seen and heard so much. I'm tired of thinking.
Almost 24,000 men are killed, missing, or maimed in just 2 days. Shiloh is the bloodiest battle in American history up to that time. Despite winning Shiloh, Grant is vilified for the shocking losses and near defeat. Many demand his removal from command. President Lincoln refuses, saying, "I can't spare this man. He fights." In Albert Sidney Johnston, the Confederacy loses a prized leader. No general will fill his void in the Western theater.
His death was probably a greater blow to the Confederacy than the defeat at Shiloh. There was stuff for another Robert E. Lee in him. Perhaps even the result at Shiloh might have been different.
Beginning in May with Corinth, the Union Army embarks on a Western mission of conquest, with many more places to fall. Vicksburg, Chattanooga, Atlanta.
I have spent a considerable amount of time in studying, no, this is too strong an expression, in contemplating the horrors of war. And only once, later in the war, did I behold a spectacle as sickening as Shiloh.
The battlefield is quiet now, though a new fight is ongoing against the foes of time and progress. Nearly 4,000 acres of land have been preserved. Once host to two of the bloodiest days in American history, Shiloh is now one of the best preserved battlefields of the Civil War. A sprawling living monument to the sacrifices made there 150 years ago.
I recall with difficulty the danger and death and horrors of the time. And without effort, all that was gracious and picturesque. Ah, youth.